Hello everyone, it's Catherine. I was asked to do a little workshop for us around writing process, and so I put together this slide presentation and video that will take about 15 minutes to get through, and it's designed to be interactive. So I'm going to ask you in a couple of moments to pause the video, get some paper and a pen, and to do a little bit of writing. I'm going to ask that you write your initial responses to the questions that are on the screen right now. Those questions are the essential questions or driving questions of this little workshop. So we want to examine what is writing process, and also how can we use it to support all of the writers in our classroom collectively and individually. So if you'd pause the video and write your initial responses to those questions before moving on, that would be great. Thank you. So now that you've got a little bit of writing on process and how to use it to support writers, I want to pause for a second to just acknowledge that each and every one of us comes to this year at Summit School with a variety of experience and a variety of expertise around the teaching of writing and also around the teaching of project-based learning. So I am sharing with you what I know, but I intend for this to be a conversation, and hopefully we will have that conversation at the end of August when we all come together. So you have your initial writing, and I'm going to propose that the research over decades shows that writing process is a number of things and it is not a number of things. And so I focused on just three major things that writing process is, that the writing community and the teaching community around writing agrees upon, and three things that correlate with those. So we can see for certain that writing is a series of phases through which a writer moves back and forth. This is not a linear process necessarily. It's not that one step is completed and then we move on to the next step until that's completed and we move on to the next step and so forth. That would be very neat. That would be very linear. But the writing process, I think everybody agrees, can be a bit more messy. And for each writer, it's going to be a little bit different. Which brings us to the next common understanding about writing process, which is that it's individualized and it is contextualized, meaning there is not one universal process or series of steps that works for every writer, and there isn't one universal process that works for every purpose for writing or every piece of writing. We know that the writing process is definitely cumulative. Each phase does contribute to subsequent phases. And those phases are not disjointed, meaning each phase does not serve a singular disconnected purpose from the whole piece of writing. So I'm going to ask you to pause again and just write a little bit to explore how this information fits with or deviates from the way you have taught writing process in the past. When you're ready, come on back to the video. Welcome back. So, there's definitely an assumption that I'm making here in this workshop, and that is that we all agree that we want to utilize a common language around writing process and that we want to accept that there is a process through which students will go in order to produce a piece of writing. But let's just take a moment to backtrack here for a second and think about why. Why do we want common language around this? Why do we want to talk about process? So what I have on this screen on the left side is just a kind of, mess of things that we teach in writing. And these aren't, specific lessons necessarily, but more like categories of things that we teach. We definitely teach about plot and pre-writing strategies and methods, and we teach about sentence syntax and idea syntax throughout an entire piece, and we teach about punctuation and spelling and capitalization, right? We teach spelling, we teach even how to formulate letters. We teach how to put words together to make phrases and then sentences, how to express our ideas. There are so many things that go into writing. Right? So how can the process help us organize all of that stuff, all of those lessons, so that we have kind of created for ourselves time frames in which to teach different things so that we're being really careful not to overwhelm young writers and get them to shut down from their development. The major thing here, I think, is that because there are so many things to teach, it can be really easy to just confuse young writers and to make them feel like there is way too much for them to learn and they're never going to get it. So I think that writing process can help us to organize all of this stuff into time frames or into phases that we can then teach in a way that really supports and encourages young writers to keep developing as writers. So what I have here is some proposed language, and this will look familiar because I shared this through the course of last school year. And so I'm proposing that we use the language of idea as the first phase of the process, development as the next phase of the process, refine, and share. There are lots of different collections of phrases that people use in writing process, but I'm wondering if this could be it for Summit School. The thing that I really like about it is it marries traditional language around writing process with the newer language around project process. And since we are a project-based learning school, I think it would be nice to have one frame for process, whether we're talking about writing or project. And so if we look a little bit closer in the idea phase, this is when kids would be thinking about learning how to generate ideas, collecting a few different ideas, and then choosing one to develop. And then they would move into the development phase where they're planning their work and they're drafting and they're doing some of the initial revision work. And then when they have a completed piece that they're feeling like it's really developing into something worth sharing, then they get into refining, where they're now bringing in kind of a team of peers and the teacher to give some feedback to drive more revision. And they get into the editing for grammar, convention, spelling, all of that stuff. And they really start to think about their format for the final piece and how they're structuring the final piece and doing some polishing work to make it really ready for sharing, where they do in the sharing phase, it's like the final just polishing of the final piece. And by polishing, I just mean, they've printed out their final work and then they read it and they say, oh my gosh, there's a typo. They get a little white out. They clean that up. To publish is to, hand the writing over and then to distribute it to a bigger community. That's the sharing phase. So would you now just take a moment to really think about that language that I'm proposing over here on the right side and write out your thoughts about it. What are your thoughts about this language? Do you think that it supports writers during the writing process? Do you think it's language that really works for the SSP community? Do you think it's language that you would like to adopt in your home base and that we can use, from K through 12 with families, with students, with one another? Just write for a few moments your thoughts on that. Thanks. Okay, welcome back. So I mentioned that we can organize all the lessons that we want to teach around writing or around a project into these different phases. I want to give you just an example, kind of like a walkthrough of what that might look like. So if the whole class is in the idea phase, for example, we might actually teach a lesson on how to find or generate ideas. And then we might teach a lesson on how to choose from a list of really great ideas that we're really excited about. How can we choose just one to bring into the development phase, and so forth. We might teach a little bit about the genre that we're working in and so forth. I think in every writing phase, the grammar and conventions work needs to be ongoing, but it also should kind of reflect where the students are in their writing. So in an idea phase, we're probably reinforcing grammar and conventions that the students are already applying with varying degrees of proficiency. When we move into the development phase, we might get really more specific about grammar and conventions work that's going to support the piece of writing that kids are doing and raise the level of sophistication of their writing. But in this, we're also probably going to look at how, now that kids have chosen an idea, how they're going to organize that. So we might do some lessons on how to make an outline or how to plan for a piece of writing or how to map out our ideas. And then we're going to provide a lot of time for that first draft to be fully composed, right? And our grammar lessons continue and so forth. So there's just, a little example of how having a consistent process that we're all kind of using within the whole school community will help us figure out what to teach when. It's super supportive. This is the visual that I kind of rolled out last year without any discussion and or with like the most minimal discussion. So I'd love us to really kind of unpack this for a second. So here are the big phases: idea, develop, refine, and share, and we just went over those. I think the main thing that I really like about this visual and that I want to point out is that it suggests that very kind of back and forth movement throughout a process toward publication. So if we begin in the idea phase, we can see the arrows show that there's, like a really big forward movement to the next phase all the way through the process. But there's also this suggestion of we might bounce back to a previous phase for a little while. So for example, maybe we have a student who listed out a bunch of great ideas and chose an idea that they thought was going to be really great. And then in the development phase, they might realize, this idea is good, but it needs to be refined. So maybe I need to go back to the idea phase to revise it a little bit and make it even stronger so that, it's going to be, by the time we get to sharing, it's going to be something really powerful. So some things to note about the visual and about the writing process in general. Just to reiterate, writing toward publication is not linear, and I worked to create a visual that really demonstrated that. We know and we need to acknowledge continuously that every writer is going to need something different at different times, and that there's no one process that's going to fit everyone. And I think that this visual supports that as well. And finally, we did agree that it's important to have a common language, but if we think even deeper on that, we might really think how powerful that would be if Jillian and I are talking about, moving toward publication, and she says, oh, well, most of my students are in the developing phase, but I've got a couple who keep bouncing back to the idea phase. They keep changing their idea and keep starting over. I'm going to fully understand what she means and have a kind of clear sense about how much longer it's going to take her class to get through that one process. And just think about how powerful that can be for parents, especially parents who have kids in different home bases. So if you would take a moment to pause the video and write about your thoughts, just write your response. What do you think about this visual? Do you think that what do you think works in this visual and what does not work in this visual in terms of supporting the entire SSP community? What would you change? I'd like for you to get really specific here, because the goal is for us to have something concrete that we can use at the beginning of next year moving forward. So take a few moments, write about that, and then come on back. Okay, so moving on, I'd like to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite teachers of writing and of reading, Lucy Caulkins. I worked very closely with Lucy's team in New York, and every time I saw this woman, every time she spoke in front of a crowd, in all of her books, this is just one thing that she always repeats: teach the writer, not the writing. We can dig into that next year. Hopefully we will have continued workshops around the teaching of writing, because it is such a complex task for us. But yeah, teach the writer, not the writing. Moving forward, we will be able to discuss this when we come back together at the end of August. So just keep your notes handy. If there's anything else that occurs to you within the next few moments about writing process or the teaching of writing that you want to make sure we discuss as a team, can you just jot that down too on your notes from today? And then we'll talk about all of that in August. I hope that this was helpful and valuable to everyone, and I really look forward to your feedback. Okay, have a wonderful summer. Bye.